What if the films people once watched were never meant to entertain, but to guide what they believed? The 1950s turned cinema into a quiet weapon, where stories shaped fear, loyalty, and truth. Some films were pushed into every theater, while others were quietly removed when they no longer fit the narrative. What you are about to see is not just forgotten cinema. It is controlled memory in motion. Number 15. Salt of the Earth, 1954. A film so dangerous it never needed a ban. It was simply erased. That is the story of Salt of the Earth. On the surface, it looks like a modest labor drama about striking miners in New Mexico. But underneath it carries something far more explosive. Real workers, real struggles, and a perspective that directly challenged the power structure of 1950s America. When the backlash was immediate and ruthless, the creators were blacklisted during the height of the Red Scare. The U.S. government did not officially ban the film. They did something more effective. Theater owners were pressured. Projectionists refused to screen it. Labs refused to process prints. Even the lead actress, Rosaura Revueltas, was deported during production. The message was clear. This film would not be allowed to exist in public space. What makes this case chilling is how quietly it happened. No headlines, no formal prohibition, just a coordinated disappearance. For years, the film survived only in scattered private prints and underground screenings. Audiences were denied access, not because it lacked quality, but because it challenged the narrative of the time. For today, it stands as one of the clearest examples of cultural suppression in American cinema. Not through law, but through fear and control. A film they did not just reject. A film they tried to erase. Number 14. The Fall of Berlin, 1950. This is not just a film. It is a monument to power. The Fall of Berlin was designed as a cinematic celebration of Soviet victory in World War II. But more than that, it functioned as a carefully constructed myth. At its center stood Joseph Stalin, not as a leader, but as a near-divine figure guiding history itself. The film presents a version of events where Stalin personally orchestrates triumph. Soldiers look to him like a savior. Citizens celebrate him like a hero beyond question. It is propaganda in its purest form. Bold, grand, unapologetic. And for a time it served its purpose perfectly within the Soviet system. Then everything changed. After Stalin's death in 1953, the Soviet Union entered a period of de-Stalinization. Suddenly, the image that once dominated screens became politically dangerous. This film was no longer useful. It was embarrassing. Copies were withdrawn, screenings stopped. It was quietly pushed out of circulation. What makes this reversal so striking is the speed. A film built to glorify a regime became something that regime itself wanted forgotten, not banned in a dramatic sense, but buried through silence, replaced by a new narrative, one that no longer had room for the myth it once celebrated. Number 13. I Was a Communist for the FBI, 1951, a title that sounds like a confession, a film that plays like a warning. I Was a Communist for the FBI arrived at the height of Cold War paranoia, when fear itself had become a political tool. It tells the story of an undercover agent infiltrating communist groups inside the United States. Every scene is constructed to reinforce a single idea. The enemy is already inside. The tone is urgent and relentless. Suspicion hangs over every character. Conversations feel like interrogations. Loyalty becomes something to prove, rather than something to trust. This is not subtle storytelling. It is ideological messaging delivered with precision. Audiences were meant to leave the theater uneasy, watching their neighbors, questioning their surroundings. In the United States, the film was promoted and widely distributed. It aligned perfectly with the national mood. But beyond its borders, the reaction was very different. And in Soviet-aligned nations, it was banned outright. The narrative was seen as hostile propaganda designed to demonize an entire political system. It was not just rejected, it was blocked from circulation. What remains fascinating is how the same film could be embraced as truth in one country and erased as manipulation in another. That contradiction is the essence of propaganda cinema. It does not seek universal acceptance. It seeks control over perception. And in the divided world of the 1950s, that control depended entirely on which side you were on. Number 12. Big Jim McLean, 1952. A Western hero steps into the Cold War. That is the transformation at the heart of Big Jim McLean. Starring John Wayne, the film trades dusty frontier landscapes for political battlegrounds, where instead of outlaws, the enemy becomes communism. Instead of gunslingers, the story follows investigators tied to congressional power. The film openly supports the work of the House Un-American Activities Committee. It portrays communist suspects as threats hiding within everyday society. There is no ambiguity, no moral gray area. The message is direct. America is under attack from within, and it must defend itself without hesitation. The film becomes less about characters and more about justification. Domestically, it found an audience ready to accept that message, but internationally, the response fractured. In several countries, the film faced restrictions or bans. Governments saw it not as entertainment, but as political messaging exported through cinema. It was viewed as an attempt to shape opinion beyond American borders. What gives this film its lasting impact is how clearly it reflects its moment. Fear transformed into narrative, politics turned into spectacle, and a cultural icon used to reinforce ideology. It was not hidden propaganda. It was visible and unapologetic, which is exactly why many places refused to show it at all. Number 11, Man on a Tightrope, 1953. A circus becomes a prison. That is the unsettling premise of Man on a Tightrope. Set inside a traveling circus trapped behind the Iron Curtain, the film uses performance as a metaphor for survival. Every act hides fear. Every smile masks control. Freedom is not a right here, it is a risk. The story follows a group desperate to escape. Their lives are dictated by an unseen authority that watches every move. Conversations are guarded. Trust is fragile. Even art becomes a tool of obedience. The film paints a stark image of life under a restrictive regime where escape feels almost impossible yet necessary. What makes this film powerful is not spectacle, but tension. It builds a world where silence carries weight and hesitation can cost everything. The message is unmistakable. This is a warning about control and the cost of living without freedom. It aligns clearly with Western Cold War narratives. In Eastern Bloc countries, the reaction was swift. The film was banned. Its depiction of oppression was seen as hostile propaganda. It challenged the image those governments wanted to project, so it was removed from public view. Not debated, not criticized, simply erased from screens. This is where cinema becomes a battlefield. One side calls it truth, the other calls it distortion. And somewhere in between, the audience is denied the chance to decide for themselves. Number 10, The Steel Helmet, 1951. War films often celebrate victory. The Steel Helmet does something more complicated. It places the audience directly into the chaos of the Korean War. The environment feels raw, the danger feels immediate, and the narrative carries a clear ideological weight beneath its surface. Directed by Samuel Fuller, the film blends realism with messaging. Soldiers are shown as determined, yet vulnerable. The enemy is depicted through a lens shaped by conflict and fear. Dialogue reinforces the idea of defending freedom against a rising threat. It is not subtle. It is deliberate. What sets this film apart is its intensity. It does not rely on grand speeches. It uses atmosphere and confrontation, or the tension between characters mirrors the larger political struggle. Every moment feels like it is building towards something larger than the battlefield itself. Outside the United States, the reception was divided. In some regions, particularly those aligned with opposing political interests, the film faced restrictions. Its portrayal of the conflict was seen as one-sided, a narrative designed to justify a position rather than explore complexity. This is the defining trait of propaganda cinema. It does not aim for balance, it aims for conviction. And when that conviction clashes with another system, the result is predictable. The film disappears, not because it failed, but because it said too much from one side. Number 9. This is Korea, 1951. War is not just fought with weapons, it is shaped with images. This is Korea. It was created to do exactly that. Produced during the Korean War, it presents the conflict through a carefully controlled lens. The goal is not ambiguity. The goal is clarity. A clear enemy. A clear justification. a clear emotional response. The documentary uses real footage from the battlefield, smoke-filled landscapes, soldiers moving through uncertainty, civilians caught in destruction, but every image is framed to support a narrative. The United Nations forces are portrayed as protectors. The opposition is presented as a looming threat. There is no space for neutrality, only alignment. Narrated with authority, the film guides the viewer toward a specific interpretation. It does not ask questions. It delivers conclusions. This is where documentary becomes persuasion, where reality is edited into message, and where war is transformed into a story with a defined moral direction. In Western countries, the film served its purpose effectively. It reinforced public support. It justified involvement. But in communist-aligned regions, the reaction was immediate. The film was restricted or outright banned. It was seen as ideological warfare disguised as documentation. This is the power of propaganda. It turns footage into argument. It transforms events into narrative. And depending on where you stand, it becomes either truth or something that must never be seen. Number 8. Five Fingers, 1952. Espionage films often deal in secrets. Five Fingers goes further. It turns secrecy into a political statement. Based on a real-life spy story, the film explores betrayal, intelligence, and shifting loyalties during a time when trust itself had become unstable. The narrative follows a servant who secretly sells information to the highest bidder. It is a story about power hidden beneath ordinary roles, about how influence operates quietly behind official structures. But beneath the surface lies a deeper tension. The Cold War is present in every decision. Every exchange carries ideological weight. Unlike overt propaganda, this film operates with subtlety. It does not shout its message. It embeds it within intrigue. The West is framed as strategic and resourceful. The opposing forces are portrayed through suspicion and uncertainty. The audience is guided without being directly instructed. This subtle approach made the film more complex to control, for in some countries it faced censorship not because it was obvious propaganda, but because it shaped perception indirectly. It influenced how viewers understood espionage and allegiance during a volatile political era. That is what made it powerful. It did not need to declare its position. It allowed the story to do the work. And in a world divided by ideology, even that was enough to make it unwelcome in certain places. Number 7. Berlin, Ecke Schönhauser, 1957. A street corner becomes a battlefield of influence. Berlin, Ecke Schönhauser, looks like a youth drama on the surface. Teenagers drifting through post-war Berlin, searching for identity, testing limits. But beneath that realism lies a carefully structured ideological message. And the film was produced in East Germany at a time when the state was deeply concerned about young people looking toward the West. Western music, Western fashion, Western freedom. All of it represented a threat to ideological control. This film responds by reframing rebellion itself. It suggests that true belonging comes from embracing socialist values rather than escaping them. Characters who chase Western ideals are shown as lost or unstable. Those who return to the collective are portrayed as grounded and purposeful. The transformation is not subtle. It is designed. The audience is guided toward a conclusion without being directly instructed. Inside East Germany, the film was promoted as a realistic reflection of youth struggle. But outside that system, it faced limited distribution. The Western countries viewed it as ideological messaging aimed at shaping young minds. It was not openly banned everywhere, but it was carefully avoided and rarely screened. This is a quieter form of propaganda. It does not shout. It redirects. It takes everyday life and slowly reshapes it into a lesson. And for that reason, it became something many places chose not to show. Number 6. The Red Danube, 1950 circulation. A war ends. A new conflict begins. The Red Danube captures that transition with unsettling clarity. Set in post-war Vienna, the film deals with displaced persons caught between competing political systems. But it does not remain neutral for long. The narrative gradually shifts toward a clear ideological stance. Soviet authorities are depicted with suspicion. Western forces are framed as protectors of individual freedom. The tension is not just personal, It is geopolitical. Every decision made by the characters reflects a larger struggle between two worldviews. What makes the film effective is its emotional framing. It uses human stories to reinforce political conclusions: fear of forced repatriation, anxiety over lost identity. These elements create sympathy that aligns with the film's message. The audience is not told what to believe. They are led to feel it. In Western countries, the film was accepted and distributed. It matched the emerging Cold War narrative. But in Eastern Bloc nations, it was restricted or banned. The portrayal of Soviet influence was seen as hostile and unacceptable. This is how propaganda adapts. It moves beyond slogans and into storytelling, where it embeds ideology within emotion. And when that emotion challenges a competing system, the response is predictable. The film is removed from view, not because it lacks impact, but because it has too much of it. Number 5. The Bridge, 1959. War is often glorified. The Bridge does the opposite. It strips away illusion and exposes the machinery beneath. On the surface, this is a story about young German boys defending a meaningless bridge in the final days of World War II. But beneath that story lies something far more unsettling: a quiet dismantling of the very propaganda that once shaped them. These boys have been raised on ideology, fed with promises of honor and sacrifice, told that loyalty defines their worth. When they are finally given a mission, they treat it as destiny. But the reality they face is chaos, confusion, pointless death. The bridge they defend holds no strategic value, yet they fight as if history depends on it. This is where the film becomes dangerous. It does not just criticize war, it exposes how propaganda creates obedience without understanding. It shows how young minds are molded and then abandoned. The emotional impact is direct and difficult to ignore. In West Germany, the film was eventually recognized for its honesty, but in some regions it faced resistance and limited circulation, not because it supported propaganda, but because it dismantled it. It challenged narratives that many still relied on. That is a different kind of threat. A film that does not promote ideology, but reveals how it works. And in doing so, it becomes something certain systems would rather not confront. Number 4. Hiroshima, Mon Amour, 1959. Memory can be controlled. That is the quiet tension inside Hiroshima, Mon Amour. It is not a traditional propaganda film. It operates differently. It explores how history is remembered and how certain truths are softened or avoided altogether. The film moves between past and present, between personal trauma and global tragedy. The bombing of Hiroshima is not shown as spectacle. It is felt through fragmented memory, through silence, through absence. This approach creates something powerful. It forces the audience to confront what is not being directly stated. That is where its political weight emerges. The film does not deliver a clear ideological message. Instead, it questions the narratives that surround historical events. It challenges simplified versions of reality. Thus, it suggests that memory itself can be shaped and controlled. Because of this, it faced censorship and restrictions in several regions. Not outright bans everywhere, but careful limitation. Its portrayal of nuclear aftermath and emotional truth did not align with official narratives in certain countries. It was considered uncomfortable, disruptive. This is a different form of suppression, not because the film promotes propaganda, but because it resists it. It refuses to present history in a controlled way, and that refusal alone was enough to make it something some systems preferred to keep at a distance. Number 3. The Fog of War, 2003. The Fog of War is a powerful documentary that examines the life of Robert S. McNamara, the U.S. Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War, through a series of reflective interviews. Directed by Errol Morris, the film is often hailed as an insightful exploration of one of America's most controversial military figures. While it provides a rare, humanized perspective on McNamara's actions, it subtly frames his decisions within a larger geopolitical context, creating a narrative that is as much about self-reflection as it is about political legacy. Though The Fog of War does not explicitly advocate a political agenda, it humanizes McNamara, presenting him as a man caught in the machinations of war rather than the architect of its disasters. This nuanced portrayal blurs the line between historical documentation and propaganda. leaving viewers with a complicated sense of the American military-industrial complex. The film was released during the Iraq War, making its exploration of military decisions and the moral consequences of war especially relevant. While not banned or censored, it raised crucial questions about the role of government and military power. The Fog of War reminds us that history can be shaped not only by what is shown, but by how it is presented, leaving behind a complex legacy of war and its true costs. Number 2. Red Nightmare, 1957. A dream becomes a warning. Red Nightmare takes a simple premise and turns it into ideological shock. An ordinary American man falls asleep and wakes up in a world where communism has taken control of his daily life. Nothing feels extreme at first. That is the point. Gradually, the changes become suffocating. Personal freedom disappears. Religion is restricted. Family structure is altered. Then even children are taught to prioritize the state over parents. The transformation is slow but relentless. It creates a sense of unease that builds into fear. The film was produced with cooperation from the U.S. government and reflects Cold War messaging directly. It is not subtle. It presents a controlled scenario where the loss of freedom is inevitable under a specific system. The audience is not asked to analyze. It is guided to react. In the United States, it was distributed widely, especially in educational and military contexts. But in communist countries, it was banned. The portrayal was considered hostile and manipulative. It was not allowed to circulate. This is propaganda in its purest psychological form. It does not argue through facts. It constructs an experience, a nightmare designed to feel real enough that waking up feels like relief. And that relief becomes the message. Number 1. The Rise and Fall of Triumph of the Will, 1935. Triumph of the Will is not merely a film. It's a carefully constructed tool of propaganda. Directed by Leni Riefenstahl, this Nazi-era documentary showcases the 1934 Nuremberg rallies, elevating Adolf Hitler from political leader to messianic figure. The film's breathtaking cinematography, composed of grandiose, sweeping shots of Hitler's speeches, the military marches, and the masses of devoted followers, sought to immortalize Nazi Germany's power and unity. Riefenstahl's use of innovative camera techniques, such as dramatic angles and dynamic crowd shots, was praised for its artistic merit. Yet beneath the stunning visuals lies a chilling intent: to craft a narrative of unquestioned loyalty and supreme strength while glorifying the Nazi regime. In its time, the film was hailed as a masterpiece, a propaganda triumph that captivated audiences with its sheer scale and hypnotic appeal. But as history unfolded, Triumph of the Will became a dangerous artifact. The very film that had helped fuel Nazi fervor was now a symbol of the regime's manipulative power. When Hitler's true atrocities became apparent, the film was no longer celebrated. It was quietly suppressed. Although it was never formally banned, it was systematically buried in favor of more neutral representations of the war. What makes Triumph of the Will so haunting is its duality, an artistic triumph and a political weapon. It's a film that reveals how cinema can be weaponized, transforming a cultural medium into a tool of control, while also serving as a testament to the lengths regimes will go to shape public perception and silence opposition.